The summer of 1981 in South Texas carried a heat that never seemed to end. It was the kind that turned the air syrupy, heavy with the smell of dry grass and motor oil, the kind that made even time feel slow. In the small border town of Elridge, days stretched long and quiet. People left their doors unlocked, their cars idling while they ran quick errands. Trust was part of the air there, as constant as the hum of cicadas. On the corner of Maple Drive, where the asphalt met a patch of tall, whispering mesquite trees, stood the modest white house of Walter and Evie Marlowe. It was the kind of home built on love and patience rather than money. A porch swing faded by sun, a patchy lawn dotted with dandelions, and a screen door that always creaked before it slammed. Inside, life was simple. A little messy but full. Evie was 30, with kind brown eyes and sun-freckled skin. She had an unshakable warmth that made people linger when they stopped by. She kept a tidy home, collected church cookbooks, and had the kind of laugh that seemed to light up a room. Walter was steady, a mechanic at the local garage, his hands always marked by grease and honest work. He adored his wife, his faith, and his 3 boys. The triplets, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel Marlowe, were the kind of children who drew smiles from strangers at the grocery store. Identical in every way, same hazel eyes, same dimpled chins, same mop of dark curls, yet each carried a spark that was unmistakably his own. Lucas was bold, the dreamer, always the first to climb higher, run faster, dig deeper. Noah was thoughtful and cautious, forever watching before acting. Gabriel was the heart, impulsive, silly, always the one to make the others laugh when the air turned tense. Evie called them her 3 heartbeats. She could tell them apart without even looking, by the sound of their footsteps, by the rhythm of their breathing at night. That Friday morning in June was ordinary. Evie stood at the stove, stirring scrambled eggs while the boys played outside with their toy airplanes. The kitchen smelled of butter and toast. A country song crackled on the radio, something cheerful and twangy, the kind of tune people hummed without realizing it. She looked through the window above the sink. The triplets were out front, laughing, barefoot in the grass, their green checkered overalls gleaming in the sun. Those overalls were their favorite, a matching set Evie's sister had mailed from Dallas. Each pair had bright yellow straps and little stitched initials on the pockets, L, N, and G. "Stay where I can see you," she called. "Yes, Mom," 3 voices echoed back in perfect unison. Evie smiled and went back to cooking. The screen door banged once as Walter came in, smelling faintly of motor oil and coffee. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed the back of her neck. "You worry too much," he teased softly. "They're 6, she replied. "That's what mothers do." He chuckled, grabbed his lunchbox, and with a last kiss on her cheek, headed out. Evie watched his truck rumble away down Maple Drive, then turned back to the sink where the breakfast dishes waited. The boys' laughter drifted through the open window, high, bright, alive. That sound would haunt her for the rest of her life. Around noon, the Texas heat settled like a heavy blanket. Evie filled a pitcher with lemonade and called out to the yard. No answer. She called again, louder this time, wiping her hands on her apron. Still nothing. When she stepped onto the porch, she saw the fort the boys had built under the big pecan tree. A pile of cardboard boxes and old sheets, now silent. The toy airplanes lay in the grass, wings broken. One of the overall straps, yellow, fluttered from a low branch. Her heart stumbled. "Lucas?" she called, her voice tightening. "Noah? Gabriel?" Only the cicadas answered. At first, she assumed they'd gone next door. The Rodriguezes often let their son play with the triplets. But when she crossed the yard and knocked on their door, Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. "No, honey," she said gently. "Haven't seen them all morning." By the time Walter got home that afternoon, the neighborhood was already searching. People combed through fields, shouted names into the wind, checked creeks and sheds and ditches. The sheriff's department was called by dusk. Flashlights swept the fields until midnight. But nothing. No screams. No footprints leading away. Just 3 bicycles tipped over on the sidewalk, one tire still slowly spinning. By sunrise the next day, Elridge was no longer the kind of town that left doors unlocked. Police cars lined the street, reporters hovered near the fences, and volunteers gathered with dogs and maps. Evie sat on the porch, numb, wrapped in one of Walter's jackets. Her hands trembled as she clutched a photograph. The triplets, all three in their green checkered overalls, grinning in front of the house just hours before they vanished. The image would appear in newspapers across the state under the headline, "Three Brothers Vanish in Texas Border Town." Weeks passed. The months. Tips came in, sightings of three boys who looked alike at gas stations, diners, bus stops, but every lead went cold. The case faded from the front page, then from conversation, and finally into silence. But not for Evie. She kept their room exactly as it was, 3 beds neatly made, 3 stuffed bears lined up on the dresser, the faint scent of baby powder and crayons still clinging to the air. Every night she sat by the window, staring at the street, convinced that one day she'd hear the familiar laughter again. Walter tried to be strong. He fixed cars, paid bills, mowed the lawn. But every so often, Evie would find him sitting in the driveway after dark, head in his hands, tears streaking the oil on his face. Years turned to decades. Neighbors moved away, new families came, the pecan tree grew taller and bent slightly toward the street. But the Marlowe house stayed the same, a relic of the past, a shrine to 3 boys frozen in time. Every year on February 15th, their birthday, Evie baked 3 cakes, one for each of them, and placed them by the window. "Just in case they find their way home," she'd whisper. By 2011, 30 years had passed. Evie's hair had gone gray, her hands softer now, but the ache in her chest had never dulled. The world had moved on. New neighbors, new faces, children who didn't even know the story. But Evie still looked. In supermarkets, at church picnics, in crowds at the county fair. She scanned every face with quiet desperation. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the layers of grief and time, she still felt it, a mother's certainty. Her boys were still out there. 30 years had passed since the afternoon the laughter disappeared from Maple Drive. The White House had aged with its owners. Paint peeled from the porch rails. The swing no longer creaked because its chains had rusted solid. The pecan tree that once shaded the triplets' fort now stood like a monument, roots curling through the yard like veins of memory. Inside, Evie Marlowe, now 60, moved through the rooms the way a ghost might, quietly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the echoes. Her husband Walter, 62, had retired from the garage but still woke up at dawn every day. He said the habit helped him keep the world in order. The truth was, they lived by routines because routine was safe. Predictable. It was the one thing grief couldn't steal. On a warm Saturday in late May, the Marlowes were invited to a neighborhood birthday party. Tommy Rodriguez, the son of the family who'd once lived next door. The Rodriguezes had been there the day of the disappearance, had joined the search, had cried with them. Over the decades, life had gone on for everyone else. Children had grown, married, moved away. But when Mrs. Rodriguez called, Evie said yes without hesitation. Maybe she thought it was time. The afternoon was bright, the kind of Texas sun that burned even through sunscreen. The smell of grilled corn and mesquite filled the yard. Adults gathered in clusters, paper plates balanced on laps, while children darted through sprinklers and bounced on a rented inflatable castle. Evie wore a sun hat and a soft blue dress. Her smile, though polite, didn't quite reach her eyes. She listened to Mrs. Rodriguez talk about her garden, nodding at the right moments, sipping sweet tea. Walter stood by the grill with a group of men, laughing, but even from across the yard, she could tell it was a performance. And then, through the chatter and laughter, something caught her attention. The patio door slid open, and a man stepped out holding the hand of a little boy, maybe 8 years old. "Sorry we're late," the man said cheerfully. "Something came up at home." The boy broke free from his father's hand and ran into the yard. His curls bounced with each step. He was wearing green checkered overalls with yellow straps over a long-sleeved shirt. For Evie, the world tilted. The cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the patio. She didn't hear Mrs. Rodriguez gasp or feel the heat of the sun on her skin. All she saw was that small figure, the checkered pattern, the yellow straps, running across the grass, just as her boys had done 30 years ago. She moved without thinking. Her legs carried her forward, her breath ragged. When she reached him, she gently grabbed his shoulder. "Where did you get those clothes?" she whispered. The boy turned, startled. His eyes were wide, not the same hazel as Lucas's, but close enough to make her chest tighten. Her hand lifted instinctively to touch his curls. "Daddy," he cried, twisting away. "Daddy, she touched me." The man came quickly, his tone defensive. "What's going on?" Walter was already hurrying over. Neighbors turned to look. A hush fell over the yard. She grabbed my son," the man said, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Evie's mouth opened, but no words came out. She pointed weakly to the overalls. "Those clothes, where did you get them?" "Excuse me?" The man frowned. "What's your problem, lady?" Walter stepped in, his voice low and apologetic. "I'm so sorry. My wife didn't mean any harm. It's just those clothes. Our sons wore the same ones before they disappeared." The word hung heavy in the air. Mrs. Rodriguez approached quietly. "It's true," she told the man. "The Marlowe boys, they went missing in 1981. Everyone searched for weeks." The man's expression softened. "Oh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." He looked down at his son. "I bought these at a store months ago. I didn't know." Evie's voice trembled. Could I just look at the tag?" Walter's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "Evie, honey, let it go. It's not them." Her lips parted, but she nodded weakly. The boy clung to his father's side, frightened. Evie's heart broke for him. For herself. For everything that still hurt after 3 decades. They left soon after. Walter guided her home in silence. When they reached the house, Evie sat on the couch, her hands shaking. Walter brought her tea. She stared into the cup as if the answers might appear there. "I didn't mean to scare him," she said softly. "But for a second, Walter. For a second, I thought I was looking at Lucas." Walter sat beside her and took her hand. "I know, sweetheart." Her voice cracked. "I can't stop seeing it. Those overalls." He hesitated, then said, "The photo album's in the attic. The one with the picture of them wearing those." "Please," she whispered. "I need to see it." Walter sighed and went upstairs. Minutes later, he returned with a dusty cardboard box. Together, they opened it. Inside were small pieces of a life once full: baseball gloves, crayon drawings, 3 stuffed bears, a bundle of letters Evie had written but never mailed. At the bottom lay the photo album, leather-bound, its corners worn smooth by time. Walter placed it on his lap and opened it. The first pages were baby photos, 3 identical newborns swaddled in blankets, then toddlers covered in beach sand, laughing in unison. Evie's fingers traced the images as if by touching the paper she might touch them again. And then, the photo. The one taken the morning they disappeared. The triplets stood side by side in the front yard, wearing green checkered overalls with yellow straps, smiling into the camera, the summer sun catching their curls. Their arms were around each other's shoulders. Behind them, the Marlowe home looked just as it did now, only newer, brighter, alive. "This was an hour before they vanished," Walter said quietly. Evie leaned closer, her breath catching. "Look," she whispered. In the background, across the street. Walter squinted. Half hidden by the frame was the gleaming front end of a reddish-brown Cadillac. "You see it?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "That's Mr. Fielding's car." Evie's pulse quickened. Howard Fielding, their son's first-grade teacher. The boys adored him. He was young, charismatic, always carrying candy in his desk drawer. He'd told them stories, driven them home sometimes with parental permission. Everyone trusted him. But Fielding had moved away right before the disappearance, or so they'd been told. Didn't he leave town the week before? Evie asked, frowning. "We threw him a farewell party." "Yes," Walter said. "He told everyone he'd taken a new teaching job 2 towns over." Evie looked back at the photo. "Then what was his Cadillac doing parked in front of our house that morning?" Walter stared at her. "It could have been anyone's car." "No," she said firmly. "No one else in town drove a Cadillac. Everyone knew that car." He took the photo from her, studied it again, and then turned it over. On the back, written in her own neat handwriting, were the words, "Morning of June 12, 1981, before lunch." Walter opened the original photo envelope. The film negatives were still inside. The processing date was stamped 2 days after the disappearance. "So this photo really was taken that morning," he murmured. Evie felt a chill move through her body. If that was Mr. Fielding's car, then he might have been there. The police never mentioned interviewing him. Walter placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Honey, it's been 30 years. It could just be coincidence. Let it be." But Evie couldn't. That night, while Walter slept, she sat in the dim light of the living room, the photograph in her hands. She stared at the Cadillac until her eyes blurred with tears. Something about it gnawed at her. The memory of Fielding's farewell party came back. His easy smile, his gentle voice, the way the children clung to him. He'd said he was moving to a new school. But what if he hadn't? What if he'd stayed close, hidden in plain sight? The next morning, a message popped up on her phone. It was from Louise Mitchell, an old friend from the school board. "Annual school district retiree reunion next month. Hope to see you and Walter there." Evie stared at the message for a long time. Then she called. "Evie." Louise's voice was bright. "What a wonderful surprise. It's been ages." After some catching up, Evie asked casually, "Do you remember Mr. Howard Fielding? He taught at Oak Ridge Elementary." "Oh, Howard. Of course I remember. Lovely man. The children adored him. Do you know what happened to him after he left?" Louise paused. "Well, that's the odd thing. He never filed for a transfer. At least not through the district. Officially, he just disappeared." Evie sat up straighter. "What do you mean disappeared?" "He didn't move to another school like everyone thought. From what I've heard, he started some kind of private charity farm somewhere out in rural Texas. Works with immigrant kids. I think it's called..." There was a pause. Then, "Yes. Howard's Haven for Hope. That's it." Evie repeated the name softly, committing it to memory. "Howard's Haven for Hope." Louise chuckled. "Why the sudden interest?" "Oh, just nostalgia," Evie said quickly. "He was always good with children." After the call, Evie sat at the computer and searched. The website was simple. White background, blue letters. The banner showed smiling boys and young men working on a farm under the Texas sun. Howard Fielding was there in a staff photo, older now, white-haired but still recognizable. His biography said he'd dedicated his life to helping children in need. Beneath the contact information was an address, just a 90-minute drive away. Evie stared at the screen, heart pounding. After 30 years, she finally had a lead. Evie sat in front of her computer long after the glow of daylight faded. The website for Howard's Haven for Hope remained on the screen, its soft blue letters and stock photos of smiling children mocking her sense of disbelief. There he was, Howard Fielding, her son's teacher from 3 decades ago. His face had aged, the thick dark hair now white, his eyes framed by lines that hinted at kindness and exhaustion. Yet there was something in his expression that unsettled her. Beneath the biography, the site described the farm as a sanctuary for orphaned and immigrant children, a place to grow, learn, and heal. To anyone else, it might have seemed noble. To Evie, it felt wrong. The more she stared at that photo, the more her chest tightened. What if this wasn't coincidence? What if this farm, this man, held the truth she'd been searching for all these years? Her mind raced back to that farewell party in 1981. The laughter of the children, the tearful goodbyes, the farewell cake. Howard had hugged each student and told them to always stay curious. The triplets had adored him. Lucas especially. He'd drawn Howard a picture of his Cadillac, the same reddish-brown one in their photo. Howard had promised to keep it forever. Now, that same Cadillac had appeared behind her sons in the last picture ever taken of them. Evie pushed back from the desk and stood, dizzy from the flood of memories. The clock read 11:45 a.m. Walter was at his doctor's appointment. If she left now, she could make it to the farm before afternoon. She picked up the phone and dialed Walter. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered, his voice steady. "Just finished with the doctor. Everything looks good." "Walter," she said, I found something. Her tone made him instantly alert. What is it? Howard. I found him. He runs a farm now, for immigrant kids. It's only 90 minutes from here. I want to go. A long pause. Evie, we don't know that this means anything. It's been 30 years. I know what I saw, she said quietly. His Cadillac was in that photo. And now this. She heard him sigh on the other end. All right, he said finally. If it'll give you peace, we'll go. But we call first. I already checked, she replied. There's no phone number. Just an email. Then we'll send one, Walter said. And we'll go after my appointment. Meet me at the clinic. Okay, Evie said, grabbing her purse. I'll see you soon. The day had grown hotter by the time she left the house. The streets shimmered under the Texas sun. At the bus stop, a young woman handed her a flyer, County Agricultural Fair, this week only. Evie glanced at it absently, then froze. One of the scheduled events was a charity auction hosted by Howard's Haven for Hope, taking place just a few miles from the farm that very afternoon. Her pulse quickened. When she reached the clinic, Walter was waiting, leaning against their old sedan. He smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that was mostly habit now, a small effort to keep her grounded. Doctor says I'm fit as a horse, he said, patting his chest. Ready for our little adventure? Evie handed him the flyer. The farm's close to this event. If Howard isn't there, maybe we can find someone who knows him. Walter studied the flyer and nodded. Then that's our plan. They set off, the hum of the engine blending with the endless drone of summer insects outside. As the miles passed, the landscape shifted. Suburban sprawl gave way to wide stretches of farmland, endless rows of corn and wheat glinting gold under the sun. Evie stared out the window, her fingers tightening on her seatbelt. You think I'm crazy, don't you? She asked softly. Walter kept his eyes on the road. No. I think you're a mother who never stopped looking. She turned to him, tears welling. What if I'm wrong? Then we'll come home, he said gently. But if you're right, then we finally get answers. They drove in silence for a while longer until a wooden sign appeared ahead, weathered but neatly painted, Howard's Haven for Hope. The gravel road stretched for nearly half a mile, lined with oak trees whose branches arched like sentinels over the path. At the end stood a collection of buildings, a large farmhouse, several barns, and a few smaller cottages surrounded by open fields. Children's laughter carried faintly in the distance. Walter parked the car. The heat rolled in as they opened their doors. Looks peaceful, he said. Too peaceful, Evie murmured. A young man stepped out from one of the barns, wiping his hands on a towel. He was tall, tan, and probably in his early 20s. Hi there, he called out, friendly and open. Can I help you folks? Yes, Walter said, smiling politely. We're looking for Mr. Howard Fielding. We're old friends from his teaching days. The young man's expression brightened. Oh, Mr. Fielding. You just missed him. He's at the county fair today with most of our team. We're running a booth there. Evie's heart sank. I see, she said softly. Would it be all right if we looked around a bit? Walter asked. We've heard wonderful things about this place. Sure, the young man said. Let me check with our supervisor. He stepped aside, made a brief phone call, then returned smiling. Oh good. I can show you around. The tour was pleasant enough, almost too pleasant. The young man, whose name was Mateo, explained how the farm taught immigrant children about agriculture, self-sufficiency, and teamwork. He spoke with pride, and everything he showed them seemed wholesome: vegetable patches, a stable with 2 horses, a play area filled with children's drawings. But something about the stillness in the air, the perfect order of it all, made Evie uneasy. As they approached a colorful barn decorated with murals of animals and handprints, Mateo said, "This is one of our special buildings. We call it the Discovery Barn. It's where the kids do crafts and projects." Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of hay and paint. Artworks covered the walls, childish scribbles of suns, trees, and smiling faces. At a table near the back, a man was arranging jars of colored sand and craft materials. He looked up as they entered. His smile was wide, almost too wide. Ferdinand, Matteo said. These are friends of Mr. Fielding. They stopped by hoping to see him. The man wiped his hands and approached. His hair was thick and black, slightly curly. His features, the shape of his jaw, the dimple that appeared when he smiled, made Evie's breath catch. I'm Ferdinand, he said, extending a hand. Evie Marlowe, she said softly. This is my husband, Walter. Ferdinand's grip was firm, his smile warm. Welcome. Always nice to meet friends of Mr. Howard's. He's a great man, saved me when I was a kid. Been here ever since. Evie studied his face, her heart pounding. He was in his late 30s, the right age. His eyes, his hair, the curve of his lips. It was like seeing Lucas grown up. She struggled to steady her voice. You said he saved you? Yes, Ferdinand replied, still smiling. I was 6 years old, abandoned. Mr. Howard took me in. Taught me everything I know. Evie's throat tightened. 6 years old. He nodded. That was a long time ago. He's been a father to me. Walter's hand brushed lightly against hers, a quiet warning. But Evie couldn't look away. Her gaze wandered around the barn until it landed on a drawing hanging above Ferdinand's workspace. A car made from glued grains of colored rice. A red Cadillac. Her knees nearly gave out. That's a beautiful drawing, she said carefully. Ferdinand turned, glancing at it with pride. Yeah, that's mine. Made it as an example for the kids. Mr. Howard loves that car. Still has it, actually. Evie's voice trembled. Still has it. Of course. He drove it to the fair this morning, Ferdinand said casually. Walter stepped forward. You've been here your whole life? Pretty much. Since I can remember. Ferdinand smiled again, but something flickered behind his eyes, a hint of guardedness. Mr. Howard gave me everything. Me and my brothers. Evie froze. You have brothers? Yes, 2 of them. Diego and Marco. We're triplets, actually. He chuckled softly. We get that a lot. People always mix us up. The sound of his laughter felt like a ghost reaching through time. Evie's breath came shallow. Walter cleared his throat. Are your brothers here? Not today. Diego went with Mr. Howard to the fair, and Marco's helping at the main house. Evie felt her vision blur. Triplets. Same age. The teacher. It was as if 30 years collapsed into a single moment. She forced a smile. Thank you for showing us around, Ferdinand. This place is incredible. My pleasure, he said warmly. You should come to the fair later. We're doing a kids' performance. It's going to be great. Back in the car, Evie's hands trembled as she buckled her seatbelt. Triplets, she whispered. Walter, he said triplets. Walter nodded slowly, staring through the windshield. I heard. Her eyes glistened. Lucas, Noah, Gabriel. It has to be them. He reached over, squeezing her hand. Let's not jump ahead. We'll go to the fair. We'll find Howard. And we'll get answers. As they drove down the dusty road, the sign for Howard's Haven grew smaller in the rearview mirror. But in Evie's mind, something enormous had just cracked open. A silence that had lasted 30 years, now beginning to whisper the truth. The county fairgrounds were alive with color and noise. The air shimmered with heat and the smell of fried dough, livestock, and gasoline. Children laughed as they spun on rusted rides. Music blared from speakers near the game booths, and somewhere, a rodeo announcer's voice echoed faintly over the loudspeakers. For Evie and Walter Marlowe, it was both familiar and foreign, a place built on joy, where something dark waited beneath the noise. They parked at the edge of the lot, beside a row of pickup trucks and horse trailers. Evie's eyes scanned the crowd the moment she stepped out of the car. Every face she saw was a possibility. Every sound seemed sharper. Let's find the booth, Walter said, holding her hand gently, steadying her. They followed the signs toward the agricultural exhibits. After a few minutes, Evie spotted a white tent with a blue banner stretched across the top, Howard's Haven for Hope. Her heart clenched. There? She whispered. Under the tent stood a group of volunteers wearing matching shirts with the farm's logo. And at the center of them, speaking to a middle-aged couple, was Howard Fielding. Even after 30 years, she recognized him. His hair had turned silver, his posture slightly bent, but his gestures were the same, animated hands, the same bright, performative smile he used to wear when reading stories to the children. Walter squeezed her hand. "You sure you're ready for this?" Evie nodded, her eyes never leaving Howard. "I've been ready for 30 years. They waited until the couple finished talking and stepped away. Then Walter cleared his throat and said softly, "Mr. Fielding." Howard turned, polite and unsuspecting. "Yes. You probably don't remember us," Evie said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "I'm Evie Marlowe, and this is my husband, Walter. Our sons, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel, they were your students at Oak Ridge Elementary." For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then his expression softened into recognition. "My goodness," he said, smiling warmly. "The Marlowe family. Of course. Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel, bright boys always together. It's been, 30 years?" "Yes," Walter said evenly. 30 years this June." Howard's eyes clouded for a fraction of a second. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "A terrible tragedy. I always wished there was something I could have done." Evie's voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "We were surprised to learn you stayed in Texas. Everyone thought you moved away right before they disappeared." "I did," he replied quickly. "I left town before it happened. Otherwise, the police would have spoken to me. I remember reading about it later. Broke my heart." Evie reached into her purse and pulled out the old photograph. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. "This was taken the morning they disappeared," she said. "An hour before they were gone." Howard leaned closer. "You see that car in the background?" Walter asked. "Wasn't that yours?" Howard's face went still. The cheerful light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something harder. "I don't remember," he said after a pause. "It might look like mine, but I can't say for sure." Evie studied him carefully. "You drove a reddish-brown Cadillac, didn't you?" His jaw flexed. "A long time ago, yes." Walter's tone grew firmer. "And you still have it, don't you?" "Your staff said so." Howard's smile returned, thin and brittle. "Yes. The old Cadillac. Sentimental value. I restored it years ago. It's not unusual for cars to look similar. I'm afraid memory plays tricks after this much time." Evie tucked the photo back into her purse. "Maybe. Or maybe the police missed something." For a moment, no one spoke. Around them, the fair buzzed with life, laughter, country music, the auctioneer's rhythmic patter. Yet it all seemed distant, muffled. Howard checked his watch. "Well," he said briskly, "we're packing up soon. The children from our program are about to perform. You should stay and watch. They're quite talented." Walter nodded curtly. "We might." Howard turned to his staff, giving quick instructions. As Evie and Walter stepped away, she caught the low murmur of his voice, the same calm tone he'd used to quiet restless classrooms years ago. But one phrase carried clearly through the noise. "Leave right after the performance. Get Diego here. Now." Evie froze. She turned slowly. Howard was on his phone, pacing behind the tent, his face tense. "Walter," she whispered urgently, "did you hear that?" He frowned. "Hear what?" He said, "Get Diego here. That's the name Ferdinand mentioned. His brother." Walter's eyes narrowed. "Then we stay until the end." They moved through the crowd, finding seats near the small outdoor stage at the far end of the fairgrounds. A banner above it read, "Celebrating Our Future Farmers." Children began to gather, most of them Hispanic, dressed in colorful shirts and jeans, chattering and laughing. A few volunteers helped them line up. Then the music started, a cheerful folk song in Spanish. Evie tried to focus on the performance, but her mind kept drifting. Her gaze darted between the stage, the crowd, and Howard's tent in the distance. Then she saw him. At the edge of the stage, a man was moving quickly, dark curly hair, broad shoulders, purposeful stride. He was heading toward the vendor area. "Walter," she said, clutching his arm. "That man, doesn't he look like Ferdinand?" Walter followed her gaze. The resemblance was undeniable. The same features, the same wide grin. though this man's expression was harder, more focused. Yes, Walter said quietly. That's him. Or his brother, Evie whispered. Ferdinand said they were triplets. That means there's a third. They began moving through the crowd, weaving between families and food stalls. The man, Diego, reached Howard's tent and started speaking to him. The conversation was tense. Both men gestured sharply, their faces taut. Then Howard looked over his shoulder, toward the direction of the stage, and his expression changed. For a second, Evie thought his gaze met hers. Walter, she whispered, they're leaving. Howard said something to Diego, who nodded and walked briskly toward the parking lot. Howard followed a few steps behind, carrying a briefcase. Walter grabbed her hand. Come on. They hurried after them, keeping distance. Evie's pulse roared in her ears. They reached the gravel lot just in time to see Howard unlocking the trunk of a car, the Cadillac. Its cherry red paint gleamed in the sun, even after decades. Walter, Evie said breathlessly, that's the same car. It's the one in the picture. Howard and Diego were loading bags inside. Evie's instinct screamed. He's running. Evie. But she was already pulling out her phone. She dialed 911. This is Evie Marlowe, she said quickly. My husband and I believe we've found our sons, missing since 1981, and the man who took them. The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly. Stay on the line, ma'am. Where are you? She gave the location, her words tumbling out. His name is Howard Fielding. He's here at the county fair, but he's leaving now. My sons, I think they're with him. 2 of them. The third might be at his farm. Within seconds, she was transferred to a detective, Detective Martinez, from the missing persons unit. Mrs. Marlowe, the detective said calmly, I'm familiar with your case. We've reopened it before, but nothing ever led anywhere. Can you confirm this man's identity? Yes, Evie said. It's him. We spoke to him an hour ago. He's here right now. All right. Stay where you are. Do not confront him. Deputies are on the way. Walter leaned closer. What's he saying? They're sending officers. They crouched behind a row of cars, watching. Howard climbed into the driver's seat, Diego into the passenger side. The Cadillac's engine rumbled to life. But before it could move, 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled in from opposite ends of the lot, lights flashing. Howard's head snapped up. Stay in the car, the detective's voice said in Evie's ear. They're moving in. Deputies approached the Cadillac with cautious precision, hands hovering near their holsters. Evie clutched Walter's arm, her heart pounding. Howard stepped out slowly, his expression calm, his hands raised. Officers, he said, voice steady, there must be a misunderstanding. Diego followed, confused, scanning the officers' faces. Walter's jaw tightened. They don't believe it yet, he muttered. Evie couldn't bear it. She dropped the phone, leaving the line open, and stepped out from behind the car. Howard Fielding, she shouted, her voice ringing across the lot. Every head turned. Howard's face darkened when he saw her. Mrs. Marlowe, he said tightly. Please. Let's not make a scene. Evie held up the photograph, her hand trembling. You see this? These are my sons. Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel. They disappeared 30 years ago. And that, she pointed at the Cadillac, that's your car in the background. The same car you're driving right now. Howard's jaw clenched. She turned to Diego, who stared at her, bewildered. And you, she said softly, you look just like them. Diego stepped closer, hesitating. He glanced at the photograph. Ferdinand's identical smile stared back at him. That's us, he whispered. With Marco. Howard's calm cracked. Don't listen to her, he snapped. They were abandoned. I saved them. Evie's voice broke. They were my children. You stole them. The deputies looked at each other. One of them moved forward. Mr. Fielding, I need you to place your hands behind your back. For the first time, Howard's mask slipped. His eyes, once warm, went flat and cold. But he complied. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Evie's knees nearly buckled. Walter caught her just as her strength gave out. It was over. Or maybe, it was just beginning. Later, at the sheriff's office, the truth would start to unravel piece by piece. How Ferdinand and Diego had grown up on the farm under new names, believing their parents were dead or imprisoned. How Howard had built a life around the lie that he was their savior. But that part, the confession, the reunion, belonged to another chapter. For now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evie stood beside the Cadillac, its paint dulled by time but unmistakable. She placed her hand on its hood, trembling. "This car," she whispered, "was the last thing my boys saw before they vanished." Walter wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "And now," he said softly, "it's what brought them back." The flashing red and blue lights from the sheriff's cruisers painted the farm in surreal color as the sun vanished behind the Texas plains. The air smelled of dust, hay, and gasoline, the same mix that had hung over the town 30 years ago, the day the triplets disappeared. Evie Marlowe stood behind the police line, clutching Walter's hands so tightly her knuckles were white. In front of them, Howard Fielding, now 70, was being led toward a squad car. His calm demeanor had evaporated, replaced by the hollow look of a man who'd been caught in the light after decades hiding in shadow. "Don't let him out of your sight," Detective Martinez instructed his team, his tone brisk but composed. He turned to Evie. "Mrs. Marlowe, we're taking him to the station for questioning. We'll need you and your husband to follow us there." Evie's voice shook. "Did you find the others?" "Ferdinand, Diego." "They're safe," the detective said. "They're being transported separately for interviews. We're also searching a second property registered under an alias of Mr. Fielding's. If there's anyone else there, we'll find them." Evie nodded, her throat tightening. "There's a third one," she whispered. "Marco. He said there was a third." Martinez met her eyes. "We'll find him, Mrs. Marlowe. I promise." The drive to the police station was a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and dust kicked up by patrol vehicles. Walter drove in silence, his hands rigid on the steering wheel. Evie sat beside him, the old photograph resting in her lap. She couldn't stop glancing at it, at the three smiling faces frozen in time. When they arrived, the building glowed under harsh fluorescent lights. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and paperwork filled the air. Officers moved quickly, phones ringing, voices echoing. Detective Martinez met them at the door. "We have Mr. Fielding in custody. He's agreed to talk." "Agreed," Walter repeated bitterly. "That man doesn't deserve the courtesy of a conversation." Martinez's tone softened. "Sometimes the only way to get the full truth is to let them tell it." Evie swallowed hard. "And our sons?" "They're here," Martinez said. "Two of them. Ferdinand and Diego. We've confirmed their biological matches to your DNA sample on file from the cold case." Evie's knees nearly gave out. Walter caught her arm. "You're sure?" The detective nodded. "Without question." For a long moment, Evie couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "Where are they?" "In separate rooms. They're in shock. They've been told what's happening but they don't remember much before age 6. It's complicated." Walter's voice cracked. "They were only 6 when he took them." Martinez hesitated. "We found records in his office. False birth certificates. Medical documents with his name listed as their guardian. He built new identities for all 3. Evie felt her breath falter. He didn't just take them, he remade them. Inside the interrogation room, Howard Fielding sat with his hands folded neatly on the table. He looked tired but not defeated. When Detective Martinez entered, followed by a court stenographer, he offered a faint smile. "Mr. Fielding," the detective said evenly, "you understand the charges against you?" "I do," Howard replied softly. "But I'd like it noted that I didn't harm those boys. I saved them." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Save them from what?" Howard leaned back, his voice taking on a nostalgic, almost wistful tone. "Their parents were losing control. The boys told me things. Fighting. Yelling. I couldn't stand by. They needed stability. They needed love." Martinez's pen scratched across the paper. "So you kidnapped 3 6-year-olds because you believed their parents argued?" Howard's eyes flicked upward. "You don't understand. I lost my own children in a fire. Twin boys. Beautiful boys. I couldn't save them. When I saw the Marlowe triplets, it felt divine. As if God was giving me another chance. The detective's tone hardened. You convinced them their parents were criminals. You abused them. You kept them captive for 3 decades. Howard's calm cracked for the first time. No. I gave them a life. They had food, education, purpose. I raised them to be good men. You brainwashed them, Martinez said. You built your farm around your lie. Howard's gaze dropped to the table. I loved them, he murmured. They were mine. Meanwhile, in another room, Ferdinand sat across from another detective, his hands shaking slightly as he sipped water. He was pale, eyes red, confusion etched deep in every line of his face. I don't understand, he kept saying. He told us our parents were gone. That we'd been abandoned. The detective spoke gently. You were never abandoned, Ferdinand. Your parents had been looking for you for 30 years. Ferdinand's voice broke. Then why would he lie? Because he wanted to keep you, the detective said. He told you what he needed to make that possible. Diego sat in another room, head in his hands. I remember that car, he muttered. The Cadillac. He said we were going for ice cream. He looked up, tears streaking his face. He said Mom and Dad didn't want us anymore. When Martinez entered the observation room, Evie and Walter were already there, standing behind the one-way glass. Evie's hand covered her mouth as she looked at them, 2 grown men, but still carrying pieces of her 6-year-old boys in their eyes, their gestures, their smiles. Walter whispered, "That's them." Evie nodded, tears streaming freely. Lucas. Noah. The detective spoke quietly. We're bringing them to you next. But I need to warn you, it's going to take time. They believe another life. This won't feel real right away. I've waited 30 years, Evie said softly. I can wait a little longer. An hour later, in a small, dimly lit conference room, the door opened and 2 men stepped inside. Ferdinand first, then Diego. Both hesitated when they saw her. Evie rose slowly from her chair. The photograph was still clutched in her hand. She held it out, voice trembling. This was the last day I saw you, she whispered. The men stared. Ferdinand stepped closer, his breath catching as he looked at the photo, then at her. That's us, he said softly. That's me. Evie nodded, tears spilling. Lucas, she whispered, using his real name for the first time in 30 years. He blinked, stunned. What did you call me? Lucas, she said again, her voice breaking. That's your name. For a long, breathless second, the room was silent. Then Ferdinand, Lucas, made a small, broken sound and stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her. Evie sobbed, clutching him as if she might lose him again. Diego stood frozen, watching, disbelief in his eyes. Then Walter moved closer, his voice gentle. Noah, he said softly. You were always the quiet one. Diego's lips parted, trembling. He stepped forward slowly, almost uncertainly, and Walter met him halfway, pulling him into an embrace. For the first time in 30 years, the Marlowe family held each other again. They stayed that way for a long time, the sound of quiet weeping filling the small room. When they finally separated, Evie wiped her tears and looked around. Where's Gabriel? Lucas's face changed. Marco, he said quietly. Howard kept him at the other house. He wasn't allowed at the farm. Said he was special. Detective Martinez entered just then, his expression somber. We just got word from the second team. They found him. Along with 8 other children. They're safe, being taken to the hospital for evaluation. Evie's knees buckled. Walter caught her. He's alive, she whispered. Martinez nodded. Alive. Confused but unharmed. Evie pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Oh, thank God. It was near midnight when they brought Marco to the station. He looked younger than his brothers, not in years, but in spirit, his expression wary, like someone who'd lived too long under rules he didn't understand. When he entered the room, his eyes darted between the faces, the detectives, his brothers, and finally the woman standing near the window. Evie turned slowly. For a moment, Neither of them moved. Then Marco took a single step forward. "You're her," he whispered. "The woman in the photo." Evie nodded, tears blurring her vision. "And you're my Gabriel." Something inside him seemed to break. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and collapsed into her arms. Walter joined them, and soon Lucas and Noah were there too, the 5 of them holding on to each other, 30 years of silence and grief and searching melting away in a single, impossible embrace. Evie buried her face in Marco's hair, breathing in the scent of dust and sunlight and life. "My boys," she whispered through her tears. "My beautiful boys." Outside, through the glass window, Detective Martinez watched quietly. "Let them have their moment," he murmured to an officer. Howard Fielding sat in a holding cell down the hall, staring blankly at the wall. The weight of his confession had broken him at last. He would never see freedom again. But the Marlos, after 3 decades of darkness, finally saw dawn. Weeks later, news outlets across the country told the story. The Texas triplets, missing for 30 years, found alive. People cried watching Evie's interview, hearing her say, "I never gave up. Not one day." Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel slowly began to rebuild their lives. Therapy sessions replaced farm chores. They visited the old house on Maple Drive, walked through the rooms frozen in time, saw their childhood toys still neatly arranged on the shelves. Walter rebuilt the porch swing. Evie planted sunflowers by the pecan tree. Some nights, she'd stand at the window and whisper, "Thank you," to the empty street, to the mystery, the miracle, and the memory that had led her back to her sons. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and the moonlight spilled across the kitchen floor, she'd take out the old photograph and smile. The same 3 boys, the same overalls, the same sunlight, but now, finally, no longer lost to time. Howard Fielding died in prison before trial. His farm was converted into a true rehabilitation center for foster youth, renamed Marlowe's Haven at the triplets' request. Evie and Walter still live on Maple Drive. The porch light remains on every night, not out of fear anymore, but as a symbol of what faith, persistence, and a mother's love can do. Because for 30 years, that light had burned for the boys who never came home. And one summer evening, finally, it guided them there.